Hello and welcome to Steel City Business, the Sheffield business podcast. I'm James Marriott and this is Steel City Business UNCUT, where me and co-host Stephen Kenwright meet someone from around the business world of Sheffield with a real story to tell, to dig into an issue. Being uncut means, well, there's nothing really taken out. We might tidy it up a little bit to take out the ums and the ers, but otherwise it is the full raw conversation. Right, let's do it. Hello then, here we go with another Steel City Business Uncut. I'm James, Stephen's here.
Hello.
We have ventured out of the city centre today to what I'm going to describe it as being sort of sandwiched in between Ranmore and Crooks. And that may be an issue of discussion in a moment or two. We'll find out. It's exactly 7 minutes drive from my house, which I say because it makes me sound like I live in the posh part of Sheffield. We've come to see Jessica Flinn at Jessica Flinn Jewellery. Is that all accurate?
Well, I sometimes go by Flynn Allen, depending on how I wake up each day.
Right.
Depends. And we are Jessica Flinn Jewellery and Flynn and Steel.
And the Ranmore and Crooks sandwich, accurate?
I would say Tapton.
Okay. That sounds even posher, actually. We'll go with
but Tapton, darling.
I guess the clue is very much in what we've already said, but just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yep, so I run two jewellery companies and they're predominantly in the wedding and engagement ring industry. Jessica Flinn is what you imagine when you think of an engagement ring. So we're talking gold, platinum, diamonds, sapphires. And Flynn and Steel is slightly different. It's alternative metals, predominantly wedding rings. And that tends to be kind of alternative metals like tantalum, titanium, steel, that sort of thing.
There's lots of words that I don't understand, which actually leads me to a question that I'm going to ask you later on. This is a really horrible question to ask in this way, but I'm going to do it. How successful would you say the business is?
I think a lot of people start out small kind of designer makers in this industry. They go through university and they set up a small kind of bench jewellery, and not many of those succeed. So if we're comparing ourselves to kind of a small independent maker, I would say very successful. If we're comparing us to, the big guns that we'd have down in Hatton Garden, I'd say we were pretty small fry at the moment. So it depends. It depends on what kind of ratio, what kind of score system you're using. But yeah, pretty good, pretty happy.
Do you want to be one of those?
No, definitely not.
Right.
Definitely not. Last year we actually looked at, and over the kind of last 18 months, we looked at opening a retail space in the heart of the city in Sheffield. And we decided, retail is just not for us. So yeah, not following the pattern is kind of what we do best. It's very unusual for a small company like mine to kind of enter the jewelry industry. But we choose to do the things that feel right to us. And I think that's why we've been successful over time.
And before we came on air, we were chatting about awards and other things, but you said that the jewellery industry is extremely London-centric.
Yeah.
How is it being, one of those slightly bigger than the makers outside of London? And how does that kind of compare to what does happen in London? Yeah,
something that I've noticed across my 15 years of running Jessica Flinn is that we surprise our suppliers by the size that we are. We're at this kind of middle point. We're not like a small, tiny maker anymore, but we're not a big gun. We're in this middle point. So we can overwhelm manufacturers, but we can also not have quite the buying power of the big guns. We're in this like small kind of middle zone that can be great in some ways and challenging in others.
It's an interesting industry as well that I think you're in. And I guess this probably applies to a lot of industries. And I may sound like someone who is having a go at trying to understand an industry that I don't when I say this. But I would imagine it's probably quite easy to get caught in a sort of a race to the bottom sort of thing. So he talks about the idea of opening a retail space.
Yeah.
I would imagine that would necessitate stuff that's available at a certain price point, whereas a lot of the stuff that I think you do is a bit more bespoke, and I assume that means that it's in a certain kind of price range, price category. You've probably not got 30 new customers every day, but that's not the point of it. Whereas if you've got a retail store, you kind of need that, don't you? So is that accurate? Because you can go to Argos and buy jewellery, and that's the everyday stuff that people buy and just wear, but that's not what you're about.
No, I mean, when I first got involved in designing engagement rings, it really was like a one-to-one kind of service. You know, I would sit down with customers and we'd design something together. So it's much more of like a design process than a traditional high street. If you are walking down the high street in Meadowhall and you're buying an engagement ring from Beaverbrooks, you're not our customer. We are a very different customer, and there's nothing wrong with that type of customer. Our customer likes to do things remote. They like to do things from at 10 o'clock at night. They like to design things. They want to know where the gemstones have come from. It's just a different customer. And I think in the jewelry industry, you've got lots of different types of retailers, all appealing to different customers across the industry. Our one tends to be quite tech savvy, quite interested in making a one-of-a-kind thing, for Jessica Flinn at least. And they're just a slightly different audience to the kind of traditional walk down the high street, look through the window type customer.
Do you have to kind of keep questioning yourself about that? Because I'd imagine if, that thought process and whatever discussions you had about the idea of opening a retail store, is that kind of step back and re-examine, well, where are we? And actually, where do we want to be in the market?
We've been doing a big piece of work just recently. I brought on Abby, who's our new business development director, very fancy title, who's stalking us in the corner of the room right now. But we have kind of been going back to our basics, kind of working on our mission statement in a way that we haven't done for a long time. As we've grown, we've kind of added on bits. We opened the showrooms, we kind of went online a little bit, we worked on digital products and that sort of thing. And you have to, at a point, decide like which route is your core, so you're not distracted by everything else. And so we've been doing a big project recently, but basically gets us back to our roots, back to our core. Where are we going? What's important to us? And actually, it's surprised us in these conversations what actually is important to us these days versus what it was 5 or 10 years ago.
How much of that is down to or coming from the market at the moment, right? Because I'm talking to a lot of businesses all the time that are starting to get that point where they're thinking maybe we should have a good look at ourselves and think about what we were good at in the first place. That's not to say that they're not doing lots of things that they are good at elsewhere also. But do you think, is that something that's kind of come out of the current economic climate, or is that something that was always on the cards and now has been the right opportunity to do it?
I mean, this climate is very tough. So if you can survive in this climate, you can survive in any climate. So, nothing puts the pressure on like the highest price of gold, the highest price of diamonds, the highest cost of advertising, and makes you a really slick, lean and clever business. This is the time to be clever and not just sit and hope it's all going to be okay. So a lot of the conversations have come out of, the economy. Our customers have as well changed. Over the last couple of years, there's been a huge shift in what our customers want. Not necessarily in the products, but just in the way that they buy. They're much more conscientious in like the process, rather than like before we'd have a big collection of ready to wear rings and they would choose one because it looked right to them. It was the right price point. It had the right stones in. But now every customer wants to customize. And so there's been this big shift. And so, if you don't pay attention to those shifts, the customer and economy, then you've got a problem. But if you're paying attention to those and adapting, then hopefully you set up for success. And that's basically what we're trying to do.
How do you get the balance right? Because I think about, so the first time I heard of your business was another Steel City business alumni, Amy Kilner, did some motion 3D work for you. And I think a lot of the content, a lot of the marketing I've seen you put out is very forward thinking and not necessarily just the basic stuff that you would expect from a smaller business, a northern business, etc. So how do you kind of balance between that core of what the business is great at and also a little bit of experimentation and doing some different stuff too?
Ever since I started this business, I decided I was going to dedicate 20% of my energy to experiments. And that is basically what we do still to this day. So we experiment 20% all the time, testing out things. And we made horrible mistakes in that 20%. Like things have not gone right. Spent a fortune on shop interior design and then never did a shop. And we've done experiments with, taking on marketing agencies and doing big digital PR campaigns and then not actually seeing the return on the investment that we've put in. It's not all swings and roundabouts, but I think experimenting is so important. And just, not doing what everybody else is doing. I try not to look at the other jewelry companies because, no inspiration is just going to come from that. You're going to compare yourself to what they're doing and think, oh, I should be doing that too. But instead, think about what the customers actually want. Do they care if your content is different on Instagram to TikTok? Probably not. They're just choosing which platform is right for you. You know, it's great to have PR pieces out every single month, but is it essential? You know, you just kind of have to go back to the basics and think about what are the nice to haves and then choose something to experiment on. And then some of the experiments work, and that's how you grow.
You mentioned that you don't necessarily follow a lot of what the other jewellery companies do. Are there brands out there in other industries that you do feel like you take inspiration from?
I mean, when I was looking at like kind of the retail space, I was looking at other industries. I was actually looking at dentistry quite a lot because there's a lot of very nice niche dentists these days. I don't know if you've noticed, but you can go down a high street and get a very nice dentist appointment, which is totally different to what you used to be able to do. Gone are the days where you'd like go up a back staircase and get drilled. These days, you can walk through a nice branded office.
It's true.
Yeah. What's boots? You know, I'm losing the word right now, but where you go and get your glasses. Opticians are another one. You know, you can walk down a high street now and you've got really fancy ones like David and you know, that didn't exist. Gone are the days of going to Vision Express in Meadowhall if you don't want to. So I always think, look at adjacent industries. But yeah, you can get a lot of inspiration by just thinking, well, you know, this hasn't been done before, so why don't we give it a try? We were one of the first companies to do private showrooms, and now loads of jewellery companies are doing private showrooms. We kind of joke that if everybody else is doing it, we're already too late and we're moving on. So which is why we're probably not going to do private showrooms when we go forward. Probably going to think about online innovations instead.
Just for legal purposes, I will point out there's nothing wrong with Vision Express. If people want to go there, absolutely fine. How often do you have to have conversations with people that approach you and you say, you're not right for us, we're not right for you?
All the time. I mean, we probably get... and when you think of the jewellery industry, there's these big buying groups and they want you to become like their partner and they'll give you a discount on the suppliers. But, you know, we're never going to be buying from the suppliers that everybody else is buying from. And we get, you know, contacted all the time about, you know, different agencies that can do different things for us. But, you know, we don't want to do that. We want to test it ourselves. We want to see what works. And yeah, I would say all the time. And really knowing what aligns with us is part of the battle. You know, even when it comes down to like accountants firms, you know, knowing what type of business you are to your soul then allows you to align with somebody. So, you know, you don't want an old school one. You want somebody who'll innovate with tech instead. And it's just knowing who you are really makes a big difference.
You work with your husband. So this is an interesting avenue for us to just probe for a moment. Which came first, the business or the husband?
I think the husband came first. No, I'm joking. I set up my business straight out of university, so back in 2010. And Ollie and I met in what's called the Hatchery. So Sheffield Hallam had this like business startup like office that if you were a graduate you could use. And I was starting my year and he was leaving his year, and that's where we met. So right at the beginning of starting my business, I met Ollie. But he carried on doing product design and things and furniture for a long time. And then back in 2019, he actually came to work for me full time. So he's a lover of a side hustle, is my husband. And he was making stainless steel rings for us on the side. And actually, I think that was his main revenue for a good few years before he decided, okay, I'll come and work for you. And then he worked for me from 2019 to 2023, took a break for a year, and now he's back. So yeah.
The Hatchery, by the way, is a brilliant name. I think that's probably the best name of anything that I've heard before. I mean, I assume he won't listen to this, so you can say whatever you want.
Oh, I'm sure he might.
What's it actually like then? Because I mean, there's a few people, isn't there, that are kind of, you know, husband and wife teams in business and in life and whatever. But you know, I equally know people that work is their kind of release from their home life, and getting that balance must be quite challenging. So what's it really like?
I think when he was working for me back in 2020, we started Sheffield Steel Rings, and he really, you know, was almost my direct partner in that stage. He brought an energy. He made the rings and I did all the marketing. And we were just a tiny, like almost two-man band in like lockdown. Flinn & Steel came out of a need to kind of do something else because my entire supply chain had shut down overnight for Jessica Flinn. So we needed to do something different. And that is one thing I cannot fault Ollie for. He brings energy. And he's a brilliant problem solver. So at the time, you know, we decided to set up Flinn & Steel. It's now almost as big as Jessica Flinn. They're sort of, we call them sibling companies because we like to be non-gendered. And, you know, he's still an important part. He comes and does filming for me like every month. He is here moving desks about when we need to. It's just a different relationship to when we first were like next to each other all the time. But really, my husband does the majority of our childcare. We home ed our kids because they're both neurodivergent and absolutely struggled in the traditional school. And so, he's my main support person too. So we work together, we live together. It's all tangled up. And that's what I would say is it's brilliant at times, hard at times, beautiful at times. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
I think it makes a lot of sense what you say in terms of the fact that I suppose I'm not married, but a good marriage is a partnership in the way that a good working relationship is a partnership, and what is work and what is just life is very blurry now. So I think that's a really good way of putting it. And what about the rest of the team here? Because there was a point where it was just kind of the two of you. I know you've been through kind of different stages with the business. So talk to us a little bit about the team that you've got.
I mean, by kind of early spring 21, we'd grown to 9 people, and we were still working in our house at that point. We converted a church out in Hollow Meadows, which was on the way to Lady Bower, and we were working from home still at that point. It was post-COVID. It was a bit of a strange time. We didn't really know if we took a lease on a building whether it would be okay or not, and we were 9 people. And over time we've grown up to 24, and now we're down at 15. So over time it comes and goes, ebbs and flows. It depends on what we're trying to do at the time for how many people we need. We're definitely leaning more into like freelancers and things these days because the cost of an employee is so much higher than it used to be. You just have to ebb and flow, I think, with that. We've got our core. I've got me, Abby and Amy. They're the senior leaders. And when you've got a strong senior leadership team, that really helps. And then we've got a brilliant sales team, a brilliant admin team, and a couple of marketeers. So we're quite a nice spread at the moment.
How do you go about, because obviously like you've established the business is kind of going through some stages. How do you decide that now is the time for that senior leadership team and feels like the right moment to start bringing in some expertise, experience?
I mean, I definitely should have done it maybe 6 months before I did, I think. And Abby, God, we dated business-wise for a good 6 months before she committed. So yeah, I think it comes down to, it is exhausting being a CEO and running a business, and your energy changes, and what I'm interested in changes as well. So I have to be respectful to my own brain, and my own brain likes different challenges. It likes doing 6-month batches on things. And after a while, you realize that you need somebody who's steady, and you need somebody who's going to take on some of the projects that you've got in your brain that you can't quite get to. And so, yeah, choosing when is quite a hard thing to notice, but at least I noticed maybe 6 months late rather than a couple of years late. And I've got Amy, who is a genius. Amy is golden. She can do the work of about 25 people, even though she's only one. She's tech orientated, so she thinks about all the challenges we've got in a digital way and will come up with an innovative product for us. But she's also got amazing jewellery experience. She is amazing. So yeah, nobody poach Amy, please. I would come for you.
I'm interested in, we started the podcast as well talking a little bit about Sheffield, and obviously there's the steel connection within one of the brands particularly, but how does, when you're thinking about talent particularly and growing the business, how does being in Sheffield really factor into that?
It can be challenging at times. In the future, we really want to open a workshop, a proper jewellery workshop. We do a fair amount of stuff in-house as it is, laser engraving and things. But we really do need to bring in our bench jewellers at some point in the future. We will struggle to get highly qualified bench jewellers in Sheffield just purely because it's not a hub in the UK. There are good, talented bench jewellers in Sheffield. That's not what I'm saying. But they're independent, they're freelancers, they're like, self-employed people. It's not like Birmingham where there's big workshops. It's not like London where you've still got Hatton Garden. So we probably will struggle for some roles. But, if it is so challenging that that's not going to work, then that's probably not the right route for us. So I guess we need apprenticeship schemes maybe in the future so we can train and keep talent in-house for longer. Maybe we'll have to pay huge relocation fees. I'm not sure how that'll pan out, but there's always a solution and always a way. I mean, other talent, sales talent and marketing talent, I feel like Sheffield's got a fantastic pool of people. We try to hire the right attitude rather than the experience in the sales team. It's quite hard to teach attitude, but it is easier to teach jewellery knowledge. So we put all of our salespeople through our own training program so that they can, come with the right attitude. And we often get them from other industries. So they might be an illustrator for a while, or they might be, a seamstress or something, but we bring them in-house when they've got the right skills. If you've worked in a kind of luxury market, your skills are probably transferable to what we do. But I feel like Sheffield has a really good pool of people. It's definitely not a negative in my mind anyway.
is in a really interesting place at the moment as well. And I know that on previous episodes of the podcast, I've said my agency that grew really quickly probably couldn't have done that anywhere other than Sheffield, except maybe a couple of places. But, you know, certainly probably not in London, Manchester, Leeds, and the sort of places that you think of being as the hubs. And I think, you know, you reference marketing talent. This is an interesting city because it's one of the only cities I can think of in the UK where there are more good people here than there are places for them to work. And that's not true of a Manchester, Leeds, London, and the places that get all the press and all of the attention. There's just so much competition for staff. In Sheffield, you know, I've said this before. I think I'll probably say it a bunch more times this year. This is a really good place to start a business at the moment, just because there are a lot of good people around that just have appetite to not travel to all those places, that would maybe like to work somewhere and not work on their own, not work at home sometimes, you know, those kind of things. Yeah, I think it's a time to be upbeat about it.
I think businesses, especially Sheffield businesses, though, do have to be realistic. You know, we need to offer our staff better quality of life. You know, so with even our sales team, you know, we sell product that you have to physically be with, and we still try and give them a 1 day working from home. You know, you've got to compete against these other big ones. You know, lots of marketing agencies can offer you fully remote, and so how am I going to get an in-house person who doesn't have that kind of expectation? I think you've really got to look at your own policies when it comes to your people and their well-being these days to compete against those kind of bigger agencies in other cities.
Can I go back to something that you touched on a little bit earlier on?
Yeah, absolutely.
There is a slight kind of skew on this podcast towards stuff to do with agencies, digital agencies, marketing agencies, which is kind of natural because I work with a few. Obviously, that's the world that Stephen comes from. Now, you kind of touched on the fact that you've maybe worked with a couple of agencies before and it didn't work for you.
I think the problem is with a bigger agency is that they tend to be less nimble than we need. You know, they're kind of to make a success. It's a really hard industry to be in. I would not want to work in a marketing agency right now. There's competition, you're losing clients left, right and centre, you're juggling about 10 different clients and you've only got the time for 2 or 3. It's a tough world to be in, the actual marketing agency world. For us, you know, we don't want a report at the end of the month that tells us what we're going to do in the next month. We want a change halfway through the month if it's not going to the way it needs to be. We just need really nimble kind of companies. We need shorter contracts. You know, being tied up to a 12-month contract is just not going to fly with a company my size. We need a contract that's 3 months and see how it goes. You know, they're a bit rigid, I would say, quite a lot of the marketing agencies. And we probably need an agency that's quite happy for us to test out things. You know, we don't want to necessarily commit to a 12-month SEO project. We would maybe do 3 months, see how it goes, and then maybe switch to digital PR, and then maybe switch to a Google Ads focus. You know, that we need to change as we go. We can't always commit for that long period. You know, this is a roller coaster of an industry. Drop us a high gold price next week and that's going to be our focus. We're going to be thinking about how we make different margins on our products over our digital PR campaigns. So yeah, I think short contracts is probably something that would make a big difference. And then if you're doing a great job, then we stay. You know, it's not like we're not going to commit to 12 months. If it works, then you stay.
Agency head on, Stephen. Fair comments?
I think so. I think there's reasons why those sorts of things happen, and I'm not necessarily saying that it's right that they do happen. Once you get to a certain size of agency, you have processes which dictate how you do things. So you're effectively looking for clients to buy the thing that you do. It's not very bespoke, actually, in a marketing agency environment once you get past a certain size. Mm-hmm. So the way that the market's really shifted over the last year, 2 years, but increasingly so. I think it's not just a thing that happened and is now true. I think it's trending that way. You have more specialists, you have smaller agencies, you have companies that are focused on a couple of particular things. That's not necessarily industry so much as it is a certain type of business, a certain type of relationship, a certain way of doing things. And so what inevitably has been happening at the client side, and I think this is true of companies of a lot of different sizes, but certainly true of very large companies, the CFO, the finance director, or whoever it is that's in charge of the line items sees the cost of marketing and goes, that seems like quite a lot. for us to commit to all the time. So it is that kind of fixed costs and cutting fixed costs that's a big trend at the moment. And what is ultimately happening is a lot of brands are kind of paying the same amount or paying more even for marketing, but they're paying it to people who do this specific thing and do it really, really well. So when you said a little bit earlier that you're working with a bunch of freelancers, that's a really common trend. You know, you have a lot of bigger companies that are getting rid of the SEO specialist because they have a marketing department. They tick a bit of the SEO box anyway, but every so often there's a particular requirement. They're changing their website. They're doing something that needs that kind of focus. And so they bring in someone who really knows what they're doing. And it kind of brings that power back into the client side, into the brand side a little bit more. Whereas with an agency, you're kind of relying on an agency to do all of that organization for you. Arguably it takes away some of the headaches, but at the same time, if you want to be involved with that, some clients don't, a lot of clients do, it kind of takes some of the power out of your hands as well, I think.
I mean, freelancers are amazing when you talk to, they're just, you know, so they're hungrier. So, you know, they really want it for themselves. They really want it. Every client is really important to them. And it's just, you get the right person for the right one. You know, we've got a woman called Becky at the moment who's helping us with our Google ads, and she's fantastic. You know, she's doing some of the best Google ads work we've had in a while. She's just one person. You know, it's a very different kind of market out there. I do think there's a time to go to the bigger agencies though. You know, digital PR has changed so much in the last couple of years. You know, what works, and also the amount of journalists has massively decreased. It's not as easy to do it on your own anymore. And so there's times when I think the bigger agencies are right 100%, and we would choose a bigger agency for specific things, but for like kind of your everyday kind of grind things, then freelancers is the way for us at the moment. But you know, never say never. We've got to experiment our 20%, so we'll see what happens.
I'm a big believer that in a lot of ways, like the freelance world is sort of an agency in its own right, really. You know, you can kind of piece together a team that can do amazing stuff for you, and everyone kind of knows everyone else, and people form these little kind of teams for projects and stuff like that. So that's really interesting. We're really jumping around quite a lot here because I now want to go back to touching on something that we touched on a little bit earlier on. But we were at an IT event together a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I can't for the life of me remember what you said, but you said something, you asked a question during it, and it just, this thing kind of clicked in my mind where I thought, okay, it made me think you've done things a little bit differently here rather than just going by the textbook. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, and I get a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about this sometimes, because I kind of feel like the business world generally tries to push everyone down a certain path, which is, you know, this should be your first milestone, and then you've got to do this, and then you've got to do this, and then you've got to do the other. And it's quite formulaic in terms of what, you know, how you should do things. Mm-hmm. And you should definitely not admit to things like, we use spreadsheets for things, and we don't use this kind of system, and we don't use that kind of system. And that's almost like a crime within the business world. But you were just really honest about the fact that you were, you know, not where some people would say, well, you should be doing things like this.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking you a little bit about is how you feel you've maybe kind of rode against the tide a little bit, or kind of done things a little bit differently, and not just followed that you know, path most trodden, or whatever we sum that up as. I
mean, I think right at the beginning, it was how I manufactured. That was like the big difference. You know, I love tech. And so when you think of a traditional engagement ring, you would order in the head of the ring, the setting, from one supplier, and a ring shank from another, and then you'd solder them together. It's like very on the bench, very traditional, you know. Things are made the same way that have been for 200 years. It's a very traditional industry. And I was just like, well, that just doesn't do it for me. So what am I going to do? And so I started looking at CAD. And so at first we created our designs in CAD. And then we went through a whole process of, like, you know, creating all of our models, and our models being the most important thing to us. We then decided, you know, we want to make shape to fit wedding bands, but we want people to be able to do that from afar. How are we going to do this? So we decided to create these mold pots where we send them to the customer in the post. With Flinn and Steel, when we set up, it was in the COVID times. Nobody really wanted to go into a jeweler, but how do you know your ring size from home? So we started posting out ring sizes to our customers. I think it's just responding to what feels good to me and the team and our kind of core, which is tech often, and also solving the problems that the customers actually have. That should be our focus, not necessarily like what everybody else is doing in the industry.
I know you said we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but I think there's some real interesting parallels, jewellery and agency. And I think a lot of other industries where the established way of doing things is not necessarily always particularly customer centric. It's just the way things are done, and customers are kind of supposed to get on board with that. So when I proposed to my now wife, I got, and I'm a romantic. So I was speaking at a conference in New York. I thought, I'm in New York, I'm going to go to Tiffany. I'm going to go to what I view as the Tiffany.
Yeah.
And I went and bought what I view as the classic engagement ring. And I had sneakily found out my wife's ring size, so I was going to get the right one. And what I found really interesting was that you can't get a ring size. You can't actually choose that this is the size I need. They go, no, it only comes in one size. You're going to take that and you're going to give that to your wife, and then at some point you're going to get that fixed so that it actually works for you. And I found that really weird. So I can see why that there's such an opportunity for technology and an opportunity for doing things a little bit differently, because actually there's a whole problem that kind of comes off what should be a very nice and, you know, life-changing moment that's actually just created some errands for you, right?
I mean, when you think of a proposal, you think of a man buys ring from shop, gives it to partner, right? That's like the classic setup. But that's not actually our customers. Our customers maybe create a Pinterest board and share it with their partner and tell them strongly which direction they want to go in. Our customers want to design it together. So they'll sit down in their appointment together. They might propose with a promise ring, which is just like a very affordable small piece of jewellery, then they'll replace it with the real one down the line. Our customers are maybe upgrading their rings 10 years down the line. They're very different. Like we're trying to create environments for our customers that feel right to them. You know, the Gen Zers are not going to go to their high street jewellers because their parents have. That's not interesting. That's not the way for them. They're going to choose a more ethical company because it's not going to be doing any damage to the earth. They're going to choose a tech company that's available a live chat at 10 p.m. at night. They're going to, you know, send design by email. It's a very different industry, very different world, very different. And you just need to keep focused on the customer and what they actually need and actually want, rather than just what was done. What is the normal way?
We've talked about some very insightful stuff, particularly in the last 10 minutes. Let's bring it down a level. What's the weirdest thing that anyone's ever asked you if you could make for them?
Do you know, when I was back in the day, when I was like small fry, I had a customer bring teeth with gold on and said, can I use this gold that's on these teeth for the ring? That was a strange one. We've had all sorts. I mean, one thing I've learned over the years is, you know, it isn't really that important if I like it. It's about the customer. So, you know, we've had really extravagant designs. We've had really rude engravings. We've had everything. It doesn't really matter to me. It's more about, you know, if the customer's happy, then I'm happy. You know, the joy that you see when they come and collect their like bespoke ring is unparalleled. You know, there's this buzz of excitement when they open the box and it looks exactly like they were imagining, and they take it away, and then you get the amazing proposal pictures later. It's a bless. I am so honoured to be in this industry. It's amazing.
I really enjoy stuff that celebrates how different people are, but also just how weird people are. And the best people are kind of weird, aren't they? And I sort of love that.
The most bizarre engraving, the better, as far as I'm concerned, but not Elvish. Amy W., our laser engraver, will not do Elvish. But anything else is free for all.
The child in me wants to ask just how rude things have got, but I'm not gonna ask that. I'm not gonna ask.
Not suitable for work, I'm afraid.
Do you feel that you have a master plan? Do you know where you're going?
Definitely not. No, I think at the moment, because this economy is so tough, we're just in a kind of, let's make us streamline and slick and clever. And that is our plan right now. And then when we survive this period and this next period that's coming, we'll start to have plans. I mean, part of Abby's job is to really figure out where we're going and what we're going to do and how big we're going to be and what we need to get there within the next 5 to 10 years. But at the moment, I feel like we're just adapting every day. We're pivoting every day. We're changing what we're doing every day. So it's not a time for future planning. It's a time for acting right now. But give me 6 months or a year, I'll have a plan. That's what we kind of do. You know, you get through the crisis, you get through the event, you get through the moment, and then you need to start pushing. You know, standing still isn't an option. You know, with the costs going up every year, I mean, between 20 and 30%, depending on what you're looking at, you have to grow by 20 to 30% just to stay at the same place. So, you know, in a year's time, we will have a plan. We'll have a 10-year plan kind of roughly hashed out. But I would be lying if I said that we'd probably follow it. We'd just have to adapt as we go.
And is there an overall vision though? Do you kind of think, you're not quite sure how you're going to get there, but I would like to be, I don't know, it might be lying on a beach and everyone's doing the work for me, or whatever that looks like.
I don't know. I definitely feel like I've graduated into the business can survive without me as it is at the moment, I think, apart from for like driving big projects, day to day, the customers are not relying on me getting back to them. So we've already graduated to a nice place to be. I think it'll unfold. When we move in March next year, or we intend to move in March next year, we'll probably have slightly different facilities. We'll probably have a slightly different layout of our team, and, things will become clear. I would love to have a workshop at some point and keep the skills, the jewellery skills, which are aging out in the UK here. But again, that might not be a priority in a year or two's time. We might be looking at a different type of manufacturing or a different option. I would love to grow. Always had been my plan was to grow to a 10 million turnover. And so that's what I'm still going for. I'm aiming towards it and working towards it. I mean, what that really means is kind of, tripling or quadrupling our team and size and services. And, it's a big uphill climb to get there. I think it's good to have some longer term goals, but also some kind of immediate next 6 months kind of plans, which is what we're doing at the moment.
I think that's fair. I think, again, coming from the world that I've come from, particularly in agencies, there's and touching on one of the previous points as well, there's this sort of narrative of you should want to do this particular thing. This is what you're doing it for. And there's an expectation that, you're going to sell the business, or you're doing it to get to a particular size, and otherwise it doesn't matter. And I think you're seeing a lot more of people doing things a little bit differently. Like having gone self-employed again about a month ago and thinking about what do I want? I don't want to grow, right? I don't want to have any other responsibilities, any other people, which is why I'm trading on my own name, just because that kind of precludes me from doing that, I think, a little bit. But the way that I sort of started to plan that was, I used to have a sales coach who literally told me, just write down 100 things on a bucket list, because you'll get 20 really easy, those off the top of your head, and then you'll really struggle for the next 70, and the last 10 will just be some interesting things you never really thought of that you really wanted to do. So it's that magic number of getting to a certain point, and they're all quite arbitrary in the end. And I think a lot of those things that do sort of motivate you are, I don't think it has to be this fundamental, profound thing of I'm trying to get to this particular nirvana. It's like, you know what, if I can tick along every day and I get to go to this place that I quite fancied going to, and I get to eat that restaurant that I really wanted to see, and, these kind of smaller milestones that just sort of steer you on a day-to-day basis, but towards, what feels like progress, I think that's a nice thing.
I think we're already doing a lot of what I dreamed. We're already, putting pressure on the jewellery industry to be more ethical. We're already, choosing different manufacturers because we can get recycled gold. We're already kind of leading the way. And I think that's the thing. It was, when we grow, it's not necessarily about the money. It's about the buying power. We can start trickling down to the suppliers on the ground and making changes. The jewellery industry is traditional, and it has a lot of work to do with regards to kind of, sourcing and that sort of stuff. Wouldn't it be amazing if we were the company that kind of created worldwide tracing of gemstones? There's all sorts of stuff we could do if we were bigger and had a bit more power. But yeah, you start with the right attitude on the ground, and that leads the way.
I think that attitude thing's so important, and I think you can get really sidetracked with purpose. And when you're thinking about what the purpose of a business actually is, people tend to think that purpose is about some kind of grand social goal, and it's about changing the world in this particular way, or something that feels like, it has to be making the world this much better or something like that. And it's nice when it is that. But I think the most important thing, and you see with the best entrepreneurs, is when they say they're going to do something, you kind of go, I believe that. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just when you see the fire in someone's eyes and they go, I'm doing this, and everyone goes, I think that you will. That's what I think makes the most purposeful businesses and the most successful businesses, really.
I think the thing that always strikes me is I'm not very good at looking back on what we've already achieved, so for us, when I say, we want to be more eco, we're already doing amazing things. There's there's looking back, and then there's also, you know, we're already the forerunner and that sort of stuff in the industry. And if we carry on doing that, carry on creating amazing experiences for our customers so that they're happy and they're getting an amazing product and they're getting a bespoke piece that really they care about, as well as us doing it in an ethical way and add a bit of tech, I'll be happy, you know. That is my purpose, that is my goal, and that's where I want to be.
About 4 years ago, we worked together for a day. And I came away afterwards and sat down and thought, I'm not sure if they are absolute genius or completely mental. Couldn't quite figure it out.
Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it be a bit of both?
Well, this is my question. If there's a scale and one end is genius and the other end is, I say mental, that's probably an unfair thing, but like just, you know, having fun. Mm-hmm. Where do you think you are?
Ooh, I don't know, because I think it takes, you know, you've got to be a bit crazy to keep taking the risks. You've got to have a sense of adventure to keep pushing that 20%. So on that scale, I would say probably a little bit crazy. But I mean, I'd hate to say I'm a genius. So I don't think that's true. I think surround yourself by geniuses. I think that's where I'm successful. You know, I brought in somebody like Amy and Abby, and they're, you know, you hire people that are better at stuff than you are, and you'll make a success. And so that's it. Surround yourself with genius. I can't say I am, but surrounding myself has worked out pretty well so far.
Great answer. Where would you want to be on that scale, Stephen?
I think the risk thing is the answer, right? Because in life, all profit comes from risk. If you're doing things that have got no risk attached to them, then they've probably got no money attached to them. So you've got to have a bit of an adventurous spirit. I appreciate that's not necessarily straightforward on the scale of 1 to 10 type of a thing, but I wouldn't want to, I think you don't want to be on one end or the other. I think you've got to be able to swing between the different variables when it suits, because every decision's a little bit different. Sometimes you've got a risky decision, you don't want to bet the farm. Sometimes you think, I'm all in on that, and it feels a bit terrifying to some people, but it feels right, you've got to do it.
I think risk is a bit of a bell curve as well. You couldn't possibly be taking it all the time. It ebbs and flows, just like energy. There's moments of movement and there's moments for risk, but then there's also moments for, like, you know, settling down, being calm, taking stock. It's just, yeah, I think that most entrepreneurs are a little bit more risk inclined. You know, they're a bit more comfortable in that space, and that's what makes a success for most people.
We've done really well for time today, which is good. We've been very efficient with our words. Well done, everyone. Give ourselves a little round of applause for that. Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you were kind of hoping that we would do? Or is there any subject that's not come up that you're kind of hoping would come up? Basically saying, here's an open forum. Anything you want to rant about?
I don't think so. I think I would love to hear about what you think's exciting in the city right now. What should we be paying attention to? You know, because we're so focused, not necessarily looking in the jewelry industry, and we're thinking about how we grow in an e-com way. We're not actually looking at the city. You guys are a bit more like in Sheffield. What's going on right now that we need to be aware of? You know, what's exciting about Sheffield? What's happening?
Well, I would say to that, so I think Sheffield's big advantage at the moment is that arguably it would have been fair not that long ago to say it's a bit rubbish. And so I feel like there's a lot going on at the moment that's really exciting. So, you know, you look at Heart of the City and stuff that's happening there and being done in a way that's very sympathetic to some of Sheffield's roots and things like that. Like, it feels like there's a bit of character there. There's a bit of a brand that's starting to emerge there in the centre of Sheffield, which I don't think is
food focused, maybe.
Yeah, there was I think there was a food festival at the weekend as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a long way from being perfect, and it's a long way from having that right kind of balance. And I think in terms of what Sheffield's going to be from a retail point of view, that still needs a bit of thinking about. But then I saw something the other day about a 19-year plan for Sheffield, and I first thought 19 is a strange number, but yeah. Fair play.
Okay.
But just that stuff about, actually, you can start to see something forming now in Sheffield that I don't think was there probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I know the world was a weird place 4 or 5 years ago. But before that, you know, even going back 10 years, and you just kind of like, what was Sheffield about and where was it going? And it felt like it was and I'm talking probably specifically city centre here, but was on decline, and now it feels like it's probably on the other way up, and that's kind of exciting, and I like that about Sheffield at the moment. And I realise that's probably a subject, and maybe the stuff that I've said, there'll be people listening to this who are screaming at their headphones now because they massively disagree, and I have to avoid Facebook, and particularly people commenting on news stories to do with Sheffield on Facebook, because there's a huge
never look
negative,
at the comments.
There's a huge negative thing about it at the moment. But the other thing is, like, I feel, I do a lot of networking, and I think there's some really interesting businesses around Sheffield at the moment. There's some really interesting freelancers. There's some really interesting people, and it just feels like it's a good place. It's not there yet, but the next 5-10 years feels like quite an exciting place to be involved in as it tries to get there. Does that make sense?
Everything's unfolding exactly as it should. That's what you're saying.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what I'm saying, because I don't think Sheffield's ever been a place where things just go neatly according to plan.
No, exactly. It's a bit of a chaotic route.
Yeah.
Wait, the thing is, Sheffield isn't Manchester or Leeds. It needs to be its own place. It needs to have its own vibe. It needs to have its own energy. It needs to have its own focus. It's never going to be Manchester. It's never going to be Leeds. We need to find our own kind of niche. And maybe our niche is that we have, lots of really exciting businesses that are a little bit different. What if this is a niche city instead of...
That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah. And I think the idea of more like little independent places, and the obvious place to mention is Lear's Yard at the moment, which has got some interesting stuff there. It's still relatively small. It needs a lot more stuff for it to kind of fully sort of form. But then I also think, what's happening at the moment down at Castlegate, where what they're doing there, I've still got no idea what that's going to ultimately be. But the fact you've got something where they're uncovering like the old castle remains and incorporating them into something, and I'm like, okay, well, that area was shit, wasn't it? It was awful.
It was a little...
it feels like what they're doing there, that's interesting. I don't think we've got through an episode and not talked about Victoria Keys for the last year probably now, but you're like, well, there's the next area that you could really turn into something. So I don't know, I feel quite passionate about the fact that it just feels like an interesting and I would say exciting time to be knocking around Sheffield, and I don't think that was the case 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't think there was enough happening for me to feel excited about it.
Can I ask you a question now? Because I feel like I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I feel like I'd like to interview you for a moment.
Go for it.
Obviously you've worked in big agencies and now you're a freelance. What do you think is the next big thing in the marketing world?
All right, so we have to talk about AI when we ask that question. AI, I've had an epiphany with AI quite recently, because a friend of mine used Google Gemini to generate a marketing plan for me, just to show what AI can do. And I realized just how far it's got to go. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of businesses, agencies especially, that are kind of going all in on it, and that is going to fuck them up, because it's not there. It's trained on publicly available information. And as a consultant, which I always have been in some capacity, I give all of my good stuff when someone pays me, not just on a blog post somewhere. So when you can see the list of sources that have gone into these particular reports, you think, I wouldn't have read those myself. So it's good that the AI has taken all the time away of them. I don't have to read them, but at the same time, it's not that great. So I think the next big thing is not a correction of that, because that trend is going that way. There's no stopping it now. You can see the big networks particularly making large scale redundancies and all that kind of thing to go all in on AI. But the overcorrection that comes at the other side of that is just what we've talked about right the last 20 minutes. The independents, the creative businesses, the ones that don't just follow the rule book and go, we can just take in all of those sources and spit out the same thing that we would spit out for anyone, because that's what we do. But the ones that take a business problem and go, let's think about this completely differently without any of that. What could happen? What could be different? So, we see the talent go into independents, because when they're leaving the large networks, whether forcibly or not, there's more and more people that are kind of working for themselves and have got an interesting opinion to share. So I think Sheffield's a good place for that as well, by the way. Like, typically, traditionally, you're relying on those big businesses to kind of organize the city, to organize the place, to make it feel like a thing. And you've got a lot of people who are just kind of doing it themselves, trying to get a community together. And it's quite nice. I think that's not unrelated.
I'm quite excited about the AI innovations in the jewellery industry. It'll happen a lot after the other industries because the jewellery industry is very traditional. So they'll be like very against it, just like they were when lab-grown diamonds came in and everybody was like, no, mine diamonds is the way. Whereas labs are great for the environment. But I don't see it necessarily as a solution. I think you'll always need, very clever people. We're always going to need our sales team. We're always going to need our designers to it's a tool. It's can be used to help, but it's not the solution. I'm never going to have AI agents on the website that can determine the shade of teal that looks like the sea, am I? No, I'm going to need real people. Even if they're using AI tools, everything needs to be sense checked. I don't think there's anything we should be afraid of because I think it needs to be treated just like that, like it is a tool, it's a support service. But I'm quite excited. And we when we met at that IT thing, it was about implementing a CRM and looking to AI solutions for the future. If I could get some AI that would help me pull a CAD file from 5 years ago, which had a random design that I can only describe in 2 or 3 ways, that would be really useful. There's ways that we can implement AI, I think, that will really help. I'm not saying that anytime soon we'll be AI designing rings, because I just think that's a long, long way off. But, the sales team might get a AI breakdown of their chat and a few guidance messages to say, don't forget to email this customer by this date. Use it as a tool, it's not a person. Yeah. It's just
we seem to be settling into a more sensible place when it comes to AI now, aren't we? Which for a long time people were saying, it'll just take over and do everything. So we went from no AI to suddenly people saying AI will do everything. Mm-hmm. And now we're meeting somewhere nicely in the middle and kind of going, well, actually it's a really good thing for probably any business, but where that works, no one can just say, well, you should use it for this, and this, because it's a bit different for everywhere. Absolutely. Particularly I think for stuff like what you do, where it is about a bespoke service. Mm-hmm. And if people kind of feel like, well, actually you're leaning a little bit too much on automation to do some of it, then they may say, well, it wasn't the experience that I wanted from it. So it is different for every business. There's no rules with it.
I sort of predict in the future at some point there'll be real designers don't worry, your ring's not designed by AI. We'll do it with our real designer, and our real designer is called Grace, or something along those lines. People will hunt out services because they've got that kind of real human element of it. Yeah. And there'll be an AI bot on Beaver Brooks's website because they're big and they can tailor it and they can pay for a really expensive AI bot. But the grassroots kind of bricks and mortar ones will be doing regular people for a long time, I think.
I feel like you've given Beaver Brooks a bit of a bashing in this podcast.
No, don't get me wrong. They've got some amazing policies. They do a lot of stuff that is pretty impressive. It's just different to us.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. This has been a really interesting conversation. We have, I feel like I said this at the end of every episode, but I feel like we've gone really around the houses, but talked about a lot of really interesting stuff. And I'll probably wake up in the middle of the night thinking, I wish I'd have asked about such and such. But yeah, amazing. It'll be really interesting to see in the next kind of 7 or 8 months when, you're looking at moving, where you end up going and what that next step is for you. But whatever that looks like, the very best of luck with it. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of Steel City Business. It's been really lovely to have you with us. Now, you know how this works. If you've enjoyed it and you want in on future episodes, then just follow us on your podcast app or on YouTube. The show is very active on LinkedIn. Just search for Steel City Business and come and connect with me as well while you're at it. There's loads more about the show at steelcity.business. And you can get in touch by emailing james@steelcity.business. And hey, if you're in business in Sheffield, then, well, why not put yourself forward as a guest for a future episode? And of course, we're always open for a good chat about how audio marketing could work for your brand. Until next time, thanks for listening.